I think you guys would all agree entrepreneurs are disruptors by nature. We see what no one else sees and we bring it to the market. So we've got to be disruptors. I want to give you a Coach prime example of this. Here's what he said. We're going to continuously be questioned because we do things that have never been done, and that makes people uncomfortable. But guess what? We're going to consistently do what we do because I'm here and I ain't going nowhere. Months and months ago, when he took the Colorado job, he began a narrative. Now, the narrative for Coach Prime after the TCU game has exploded. So we start with us and we begin the narrative out of us. Welcome to the Live Truly Free podcast.
Man, I love Coach Prime. I feel like if I was in a position where I was fortunate to play D1 football, he would be the first coach I'd want to go play for. He's such an inspirational leader, and the way he's really gotten so many people to buy in so quickly, it just fires me up. And not really just for the Buffaloes, but I think of him as an entrepreneur too, because I feel like what he's trying to do is what I'm aspiring to do with my company and my product.
Yeah, AJ, I think that quote from Coach Prime is really classic entrepreneurism. And he is absolutely through and through an entrepreneur, and he is making lots of people uncomfortable. That is classic entrepreneurial disruption. I recently heard Michael Margolis say something very disruptive, and it challenged my thinking on a lot of levels. Here's what he said. People never buy the product, they buy the story attached to it. Now, here's the catch, and he adds this. Not just the story you're telling, but rather the story people are telling themselves about what that thing means to them. We're going to get into this because I think for AJ, I think what you're doing is a need for a narrative. And what Coach Prime began with was a narrative. Months and months ago, when he took the Colorado job, he began a narrative. Now, the narrative for Coach Prime after the TCU game has exploded, and there are millions of people telling their version of his story and how they connect to it.
Which we're doing right now.
Yes, exactly. We're doing exactly that.
But that quote really resonated with me because that's exactly what happened with us. We got on this train right when it was announced pretty much. And I was on right when I saw the introductory press conference. The way he just told his story, the way he told of how he's coming and what's going to happen when he's there.
Right.
It was so compelling, and he was so convinced in it, and he's done it before. He was able to tell the story in a convincing way that got us, who aren't even at all related to that program, to believe well before other people have.
Right. Like with your device, when you went initially, what was kind of just sort of the pitch?
The initial pitch was it gave physical therapists and patients to recover their internal and external rotation without needing any surgery or anything like that. It helped recover from surgery. And beyond that, it would keep using that motion because it's one of the most frequently re-injured. And I can kind of tell just as I'm saying that right now, that's not a compelling Coach Prime story.
Well, no, you know what it is. Okay, so let's get honest about this. It's data. You're giving me data. You're giving me points of fact on your product. Guys, what we're talking about, believe you me, you're going to sell more by implementing some of the ideas we're talking about here. You've actually redesigned the product, and in redesigning the product, you're reforming the company to kind of start this whole thing off really with a whole new start. So what were the reactions you got the first time you went out and you start talking to physical therapists in particular?
Yeah, I got a pretty cool reception. It wasn't very warm at all. They weren't eager to really implement it, and it wasn't like they were excited to really change what they were doing at the moment.
Probably a little more muted than what Coach Prime has experienced, but you were disrupting it. So guys, what this product is, there's nothing like this on the market. And so these physical therapists aren't used to it. They've got reservations. You got a lot of rejection. They're not even considering it. And believe you me, in coaching circles, because now you're starting to hear the articles, and we are only 1 week into the season, there's a lot of pushback against what he's doing. Because it's exactly what he said in this quote. We do things that have never been done, and that makes people uncomfortable. Now, the problem is the way Coach Prime is, he's sticking it in their face. I ain't going nowhere. Okay. But there are other ways to present. You don't have to be so in your face. So you're giving me data on your product. What you missed there was narrative. So there's two things, narrative and story. So I turn to Robert McKee. Robert McKee is world famous in screenwriting circles, particularly. Every screenwriter you've ever read their name on in the ending credits has probably studied under Robert McKee at some point. What he says is all stories are narratives, but not all narratives are story. So he goes on. So basically, stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Narratives, think about like when a little kid tells a story, okay? And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. That's a narrative, okay? So if you take what you envision with whatever it is your company is, whatever product, service that you're trying to sell, if you create a narrative about the future, what you envision, that will lead to story, and it counters data. Now, where most people begin is with data. Well, data is what it does or did. Okay. Does that make sense, AJ?
Yeah. Someone's not going to buy into something for what it does or what it did. They're going to buy into it for the true long-term impact of it.
Well, it goes back to what Margolis said, and that is they buy the story attached to it. Let me give an example. So that in 1969, and I'm going to elaborate here. I think this is my impression, okay? But I know it was 1969 in Boulder, Colorado. A group of hippies started the first organic herbal tea company called Celestial Seasonings. And on the box, they had all of this writing. And it was a very colorful box, very artistic, and very well written, but it was all story about the tea, story about the company. Today, they're still in business, bigger and better than ever. And if you go to the herbal tea section, there's lots of herbal teas now. There's lots of organic herbal teas. They were the first. All of them have story on their boxes. Nobody thought Celestial Seasonings would still be in business all these years later. And they are. And they transformed an industry, by the way. They created an industry and then they transformed it. And everybody does it the way they do it. And it's with story and it's with narrative.
Yeah, and that example kind of shows me and at this point, when you go to the tea aisle, there's a million of them, and what they're all trying to differentiate is by that story. And that's kind of the same in the exercise equipment market and the physical therapy device market, is there are a ton of devices. There are a bunch of, you can only do so many motions with your shoulder. The device can only help in so many ways when it happens. So you really have to tell the story of how this device is going to change the life for the physical therapist, life for the patient, and really just life in the industry in general. Just overall how things are done. It's kind of got to be. We've done an episode on this before, I believe, but just like thinking big, it has to be more in terms of the bigger impacts. People want to buy the bigger vision rather than, yeah, AJ, thanks for helping everybody's internal and external rotation.
Yeah. So you're actually referring to episode 8, which we'll put in the show notes.
Oh, wow. That's an old one.
Yeah. It was how to present and pitch under pressure, AJ's story. And so it's AJ pitched last year a pitching contest and won $25,000. And we kind of debrief after that and talk about envisioning and how casting a vision really pulls people into it. Now, in that episode, what I'm growing and learning in some of this is, and this is all in my book as well, is that everything I talk about in writing and envisioning paragraph, what do you envision? All of that is essentially creating your envisioning narrative. And that's how you get people to buy in. Now, here's some characteristics. What you envision is a narrative. So it's not got a beginning, middle, and end because it doesn't end. it's kind of maybe a beginning, but you're envisioning the future. So we don't know how it's going to end. Just like we don't know how Coach Prime has done in games 2, 3, and 4, and by the way, and his football team. And so here's some characteristics of it. It needs to be compelling. It needs to be evocative. So you want to draw people into it. It needs to be attractive. Who wants to go into a future that's not attractive, right? It needs to have hope, promise, and not scary. In all honesty, Coach Prime is scaring the bejeebers out of all the other head coaches out there and a lot of coaches everywhere, because the narrative, listen to this, guys, this is so important. The narrative, all these other football coaches, I'll name one, Jimbo Fisher, says is it takes, you got to give me some time here to turn around the culture and get a winning culture in place. Coach Prime is blowing up that narrative, and he understands college football is a business, and he's come at it with an entrepreneurial mindset. He's a disruptor. He brought in 87 players from the portal. Everyone predicted his failure.
And what you're saying is it's 100% spot on with him being an entrepreneur and him scaring a lot of people. But those people he's scaring, those are his competitors. Those are the people who have to compete with what his company, what his product is. And they're scared that they're not going to be able to keep up because Coach Prime's able to bring in 87 people and get them to all buy in, commit low penalties, and beat the national runner-up in the first week. Imagine what you're going to do season after season as he gets to recruit people. So that's got to scare all the competitors. But the people who he needs to believe, the people who he needs to evoke all of that transforming vision from, they're bought in. That's the fans, that's the administration, that's new fans from Texas and all his players, of course, because they're the ones getting the job done.
So you're right, he is scaring the competitors, but so did you, kind of, sort of. So in a way, the therapists that you're pitching are both your friend and, like, if they don't buy, they're now your competitor because they're using a competitor's product.
I see.
So this upstart, this new to the industry, new device, new everything, their first reaction is, no, this is uncomfortable.
Especially when I say that this can help a patient outside of the clinic as well. When they go to their home, they can hear that as, oh, now they're going to do less physical therapy sessions.
Right. Yes. You use your facts about what it is as your narrative. You didn't shape your narrative to the audience. Okay. And you didn't even know it was a narrative.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, like when we did that episode 9, I guess 40 episodes ago now, that actually is a narrative. So we're both learning in this, guys. This is the key to the whole thing. Human nature is slow to change. Us human beings must be brought along. I've only known Lipton tea. Why should I buy this Celestial Seasonings? And I start reading about it and I go, they have sleepy time tea. Oh, I do have trouble sleeping at night. And there's a nice bear on there with a little pillow, So here's the thing, is that we got to be brought along slowly. You're an idiot for drinking Lipton tea. It's not going to get very far.
Yeah. So you're really changing how I'm thinking about things, and I'm realizing how wrong I did things in the past. But as you're saying all this, like, I get the concept, but I'm starting to think, how am I going to actually apply this? And what's my first steps going to be? And this is something, an exercise as we just covered, I didn't do in the past. And so I'm not too familiar with it. And I'm trying to figure out, like, how do you get started with crafting your narrative and telling your story? Like, what's Coach Prime doing? And, how do you get started with this?
So don't feel uncomfortable, because you keep really big company. Michael Margolis works with the biggest names you've ever heard of in companies, tech companies and all of that. And tech companies want to tell you all about their data. So what he comes in and does is he reshapes their data into a narrative and a story. And then the data becomes a story inside the narrative. Okay. So we're not a big tech company. We're not a big, social media company or whatever. We're just little o us. Well, that's the key. So there may be millions of other people doing what you're doing, but no one does it the way you envision it being done. So let's look at Coach Prime. There've got to be millions of football coaches. If you consider elementary school, YMCA leagues, all the way up to Nick Saban at Alabama, there's millions of coaches. And then you got all the NFL and all that. But nobody envisioned it the way Coach Prime, Deion Sanders envisioned it.
And if it could have been done before, it would have. I think there's only one Coach Prime, and there's only, one person who's going to be able to pull this off, and it's prime time.
Exactly. But if it could have been done before, why wasn't it? In other words, why is it that you are bringing a device to the shoulder rehabilitation market that nobody has thought of, that could have been thought of by anybody? Because you're doing it the way you envision it. So we start with us and we begin the narrative out of us. In other words, how do we differentiate? What's different about us? There could be a million herbal tea companies out there today. And you want to start an herbal tea company, but nobody envisions herbal tea the way you envision it because you're an entrepreneur, you're a disruptor, and you see market opportunity no one else sees. And that's the key to innovation. If everybody has developed the ultimate iPhone equivalent, why bother? But they haven't. We just don't know what that next device is.
Okay, so George, you know some of my story. I've given you a little bit of the data today.
Right. Yes.
How do I turn this into a narrative?
Right. Okay. So what do you envision for the future? And part of that was in some of your data points, actually.
We have a world where rotator cuffs tear less frequently, and when they do tear, they don't re-tear as frequently as they do. Where patients have control over the rehab process, where patients feel as if they don't feel lost when they're in rehab and they don't feel as if it's a never-ending cycle, is what I envision.
Okay. All right. That's great. All right.
These are all just the rough ideas I'm spitballing.
Right,
obviously,
right. We'll craft that. We can craft those bullet points into a lovely story and a lovely narrative. Okay. So keep McKee's quote in mind. All stories are narratives, but not all narratives are stories. Okay. So we're going to have a little bit of both in this narrative of yours. Here's what's interesting, AJ. As you said that, I'm realizing you pitched the whole wrong person for your product. You're not just disrupting okay, so let me do the narrative like Coach Prime. Okay. So I see the world of rehab, of shoulders, and I see all the equipment, and it's positively medieval in its torture-looking devices where you strap yourself to a wall and you pull this thing down or whatever. Okay, that is not helping people come along who are uncomfortable with my new product. That's disrupting the market. Okay. But the other thing is like what you're talking about is I'm putting the patient in control of his own rehab. That eliminates the need for the physical therapist, or could. So if I want to bring the physical therapist into it, I want to show them how this device, this product, is going to make their lives easier and they'll be able to impact more patients. That's where I need to start. Because if I start with that, they're going to lean in.
So it sounds like we have to figure out one narrative to be able to tell two different people two different things.
Well, it depends your audience. So this is really, really important. Who's your audience? So who was Coach Prime's audience in his initial narrative from the podium on the day he accepted the job?
The players in the transfer portal.
And the University of Colorado. Here's what he knew. He had to get two things going. Well, one thing going two ways. He had to get money flowing into the program because it had none. He had to get ticket sales to go through the roof and merch sales going through the roof. And he did. It's unbelievable what he's done because he got people buying into the narrative and they spent money. They're buying all kinds of Colorado merchandise. They're buying all kinds of tickets. This is back in April, May. This isn't like last weekend. Now it's a roll. I mean, the ball's going, it's rolling downhill big. But his narrative was directed at a particular audience. That's what you have to do with your narrative. You got to pick your audience. You're not talking to everybody.
Yeah. So it's not one narrative for two sides. We have to pick one of the sides.
Right.
And
now
tailor our narrative towards them.
Right. And that's where we get into marketing strategy and branding and some other things. But honestly, you got two potential audiences. You could go the therapist route or the direct market route, direct to the patient. And that's a different narrative because now I'm going to set you free from the therapist. Now, maybe I can come up with sort of a hybrid narrative. Like, for example, if a patient is concerned that I'm not going to have someone, I want someone to guide me in this. Okay. I don't want to just watch a video. All right. I want a doctor involved or something like that. Then I have a hybrid narrative for that. So in other words, I'm not saying it's an either or. I'm just saying you need to have your narrative very clear and very directed. I think he was doing two things in that. I think he had multiple audiences, if you will. He definitely had I don't think he was really talking to the current Colorado players.
Oh, me neither.
I think he was talking to the future Colorado players.
Yes.
He was going to bring with him. He already knew what he was doing. So you're right. I think he was going for the portal, but not just anybody, not the 3,000 people in the portal, the 87 in the portal he wanted. He knew he had a really good idea of at least 40 or 50 of who he wanted. Mm-hmm. He also was talking to the coaches he wanted. And that's the big story about Colorado no one's talking about.
But they have a bunch of great assistant
coaches. They have some great assistants. Everybody wanted to be a part of this deal. This could be a rocket ship and a ton of fun.
And it's because he crafted the narrative of what it's going to look like. And people saw, oh, Prime brings all this attention. And when that attention comes, and if we put out the product that Prime's envisioning based on the standard that he's setting, and I think I can live up to that standard.
Yeah,
he's got everybody bought in, and
then a whole nother audience are the fans, the school, the fans, that sort of thing. And the school is the primary fan base that you got to start with.
Yeah. So once we've picked our audience and we know what we're trying to do, we've envisioned what we want to tell. Mm-hmm. How do we know we have the right narrative? How do we know we have a great narrative on our hands?
Real simple. If it works. Now, okay, so look, what nobody recognizes is, do you know how long Coach Prime has been a coach?
Ever since his kids were young.
He's been a coach longer than he was a pro football player.
Yeah, so
he was 14 years as a pro football player and a year or two more than that. He's been practicing this. How long have you been a business owner? Not 14 years, right? So here's the thing is you got to figure out it's working. Here's what Coach Prime said. And here's how I know his narrative is working. These young men, they believe. Now, these young men are his audience that he was speaking to on that initial day. And they were still in the portal, though. They weren't in Colorado. Not all of them believed before. Now, that's really important. But they came up one by one, two by two to say, Coach, we believe. Now they believe. Now, this is after the game with TCU, by the way. Boulder believes. That's the city they're in. People in the front office, people in the building, the fans, the students. Now everybody wants to believe, and we've got room. So the narrative is out the gate. The narrative did the job. It attracted the best talent he could possibly get year one with a school that has won one game previous season. I mean, he's taking the bottom of the barrel and bringing it up. What you want to know is what are the results from the narrative, and then you keep tweaking the narrative as you go along. And that's how you develop a good narrative. So guys, go check out this episode right here on Envisioning. I know you're going to love it. And it's AJ's story, episode 8. And until next time, may you live truly free.